Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a former Army brat who lived worldwide before settling in a small rural community in Virginia. She and her husband reared 3 daughters and numerous cats and dogs. She began writing after retiring from 2 area history museums. Her writing is about families, relationships, and friendships. She describes her stories as biographical fiction. When not writing, she enjoys photographing birds, including a beloved osprey, working in her garden, and rescuing raptors for a rehab facility. She also likes researching her family's past on ancestral websites. She thinks there's another story there for her to tell. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Patti Procopi.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Patti, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I knew I always wanted to be a writer from the moment I learned to read. And I actually made my father teach me to read because when I was young, back in the Middle Ages, there was no such thing as kindergarten. First grade was the first school you went to, and I couldn't wait to learn to read. So I made him teach me to read. And, since the moment I read my first book, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And, in school, I wrote things. And in high school, I took writing classes. And in college, I took writing classes. And I kind of always had sort of a story playing around in my head. And depending on what was popular at the time, it was a fantasy story or a romance story or whatever. But, life gets in the way. And when you're busy and doing things, I just never had the time. Or I should say I probably had the time, but was too lazy to actually do it. So when I retired and I was kind of at loose ends and thinking, well, what's the next step? I thought, time to write. And I did.
Well, how did you choose which genre you were going to write in? Did you choose to write in the genre that you love to read the most?
I mean, I do like lots of different genres, but the first book I actually tried to write was a middle grade historical fiction novel because I worked at these 2 history museums and had, while there, created a series of sort of photo picture books, day in the life of, various young girls who lived in Jamestown at, an English girl, an Indian girl, an African girl. And so I thought I would do a book about a Yorktown girl. And of course, I thought I would write this book and, people would be beating a path to my door. I think that's a common misconception when we start writing. But I mean, I will say this as a warning to everybody out there. I knew nothing about the publishing industry, about writing. I didn't even know how long a middle grade book should be. I didn't know that there were these, rules like this book needs to be this many words and this one this many words. So I kicked that book around for a while and I did send it off to agents, but of course, it was all wrong. It wasn't long enough. And so I put that on a back burner and I started working on another book. And I can't really remember the inspiration for the book. It was kind of a book about a lonely older woman, not really me, but that one just wasn't really working for me. And at the same time, I was trying to write, my sister, who's older than me, I will point that out, was writing a memoir about losing her husband to Alzheimer's. And she's an artist. So it was a beautiful book with art and memories. But she had lost her husband, and she had gone on Match.com and was dating this guy. And she called me up one day to complain about him, this guy she was dating. And I tell you, the story exploded in my brain, just exploded. A story of two sisters, a family that's gone through a terrible tragedy, how people deal with tragedies, how we, move on from these things, how we forgive, not just others, but forgive ourselves. That's such a big thing that people struggle with, is forgiveness. And so this story in some ways just wrote itself. And that was my first novel. But once again, I knew nothing about the industry. So it took me 2 years, I think, to really whip it into shape.
2 years is not a very long time for a first book. I hear from people that took 10 years to write their first book. So that's pretty quick.
Well, maybe it was longer than 2 years. Maybe I've sort of blacked out part of it. I mean, I retired in 2016 and the book came out in 2020. Well, sort of 4 years then. But yeah, it was a while. And as I said, most of the issue was, once again, just not knowing what I was doing.
Well, we all have to learn our craft when we switch from our day jobs and our careers that we had. And
Yes.
Even though I wrote throughout those careers, writing fiction is a whole different animal. So I think it takes a while to get into that groove.
Well, and part of my problem with writing is I'm a pantser. I don't plot things. And I'm not a very disciplined writer. I'm not like one of those people. I sit at my computer from 9 to 11:30 every single morning and knock out 3,000 words. If I'm not in the mood, I don't write. It has to be, I have to feel it. I have to feel that I have something to say. I'm just not going to force myself to write something. So I would, get this brilliant idea and I would sit down and I'd write this brilliant idea. And it wasn't until later when I joined a critique group, plus the book was way too long. That was another issue. My first book was way too short. My second book was way too long. So what finally occurred to me is I needed to join a writing group. And I found a local writing club, and then I found a critique group, and they started reading my book. And one of the things they discovered is that great idea that I had in chapter 20. I'd actually written a very similar version in chapter 3. And so that was the other thing I had to do, start glomming, these two different chapters together. And really cleaning it up. And I have a list of repetitive words I use. I have it taped on the inside of my desk door. And after I write something, I open the door and I look for all those words that, we don't realize when we're writing, that we don't even see when we're reading. But if you search for them, oh my God, they're there.
That's a very common issue among us writers.
And the other mistake I made once again was I was, sending out query letters before my book was even done. I was in such a rush, I guess, because I was older. I don't have much time, and sending it out before it really was finished, fluffed and polished, and in the best of shape.
Well, then how did you proceed after you sent those queries out?
Well, I gave up querying because I got, obviously nothing but rejections, and which is very soul searing. You think that you've written the next bestseller, and you just get these form letters back. And the ones that would really make me laugh through my tears were the ones that, it would say, I would find an agent that said, I am looking for a story about two sisters who younger sister drowns and all these things happen. I mean, it would be like my book. And so I would send him a queer letter saying, I have written the book you're looking for. It's sad. It's funny. It's amazing. And I get a form letter back saying, I'm sorry, but this isn't exactly what I'm looking for. And I'm like, you said this was what you were looking for. But once again, it was all my mistake in rushing the process. And I guess that was, there were so many mistakes. I feel like I could write a novel about all the mistakes I made. And I did get one request for a full, and at that point, I think the ending for one of the sisters was a bit of a cliche. And I think if I had really had it polished and good to go. But my sister and I joke and call ourselves the names of the two sisters in the books. And so my sister was nagging me, can't you give Ivy a better ending? I mean, it's just so And so I really came up with a great ending for Ivy and Rose. And I think if I had waited, I don't know, maybe somebody would have taken it. But
I think a lot of us do that. We jump the gun and
yes.
send out lots of queries before our books are ready, and then we're disappointed. But that's very common among debut authors, I think.
Yes, because we don't know what we're doing. And I belong to a lot of Facebook groups about writers, and some of the questions that people ask, I think, oh yeah, honey, you've just got more questions than you even know. But as I said, I joined a critique group, and that really helped me start getting my book in better shape and get rid of those 10,000 repetitive words. And I remember a couple of times people would say about something I wrote, that's such a cliche. And I say, I love cliches. The reason they're cliches is they happen all the time. So why are we so hating on cliches? And in fact, my second book,
all the romance novels use tropes, and they're the same over and over. It's the same thing.
You have to follow the pattern. And in fact, my second book starts with I'm living a cliche, because the woman's husband runs off with her best friend. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. What a cliche. So anyway, I was going to this critique group and getting my book in better shape and, thinking, well, at some point I may go back to querying. But my kids told me that I just don't have the right personality for being a writer because I'm too sensitive. And I do feel, when you get your 30th rejection, I mean, it's hard to come back from that. But one day on LinkedIn, of all places, someone posted something saying, write the first paragraph of your novel. And I thought, what the heck? So I wrote the first paragraph of my novel, and I got a note under that from a publisher, a small local publisher, who said, hey, send me your book. And the rest is history. Of course, it's funny, I thought I had edited down to this, lean, mean fighting machine, and she, cut more out of it. And I always tell her, editors live on the tears of writers, and she loves that.
It's so true.
And so I got my first book published. Where is it? Ta-da!
Well, how did writing that first book change your process of writing for the second?
Um, Probably not so much. I mean, I still tend to be a pantser, and sometimes my characters go off in places that I'm like, wait, where would it get them back here? But no, they're bound and determined. So, but with this one, I did not have the book, completely written, and my critique group and I, sort of walked through it at the same time. So I was able to fix things and get rid of repetitive words, um, and not get rid of cliches, because I love a good cliche. And so I guess that process. And of course, I wasn't as worried because now I did have a publisher. So I knew I wasn't going to have to face the dreaded query. And I will say one thing about query letters. I read a million different things, how to write the best query letter. Most of them completely conflicted with each other, like start with this, no, start with that, don't mention this, be sure you mention this. And I probably wrote many versions of my query letter, and none of them worked.
I feel the same way about editors. I got hooked on the editing process and had about 7 editors look at my first manuscript, and they all wanted something different as well.
Yeah, it's funny,
Very
how,
subjective. Yeah.
oh yes, and how people react. And it's like anything, we have our own perspectives, our own feelings, and family issues. And as I say, my books are all about family issues. And it's funny, you asked me earlier if I write in the genre I like to read. Mostly I like to read mysteries and historical fiction. And so these 2 books that I wrote, my first 2 books, and even my third book, which is finished, it's a sequel to the first one, were not, my go-to reading material. I've read a lot more since I started writing like this. I've read tons of this kind of stuff. And some of them I love, and some of them I like, what?
Well, writing and reading these genres is truly subjective. And,
Yes.
I can read a Pulitzer and think, what? How in the
Mm.
world did they
Oh,
choose that
yes.
book?
I read one Pulitzer I will not name because I do try to be nice when I
Yes.
review. It was the absolute worst book I've probably ever read. Actually, I listened to it on Audible, and it probably took me over a year to finish it because I just didn't want to listen to it. And that's one thing I think people forget about when they're writing. You have to create characters that people are kind of rooting for. You can have a villain, but they have to care about your characters and want the best for them. And I've read so many books where I'm like, I don't care if all these people got on a bus and left forever. I don't even care about what happens to them.
I know. I feel the same way. I don't know how some can hit all of those top lists, and I just wonder about all of that. It's a very strange industry. Patti, we writers like to write, but we don't like to promote ourselves. And so, have you found any publicity that's worked for you?
I am the world's worst at publicity. And it's once again putting yourself out there. And the character in my second book, I'll Get By, is a very, very shy child. Once again, biographical fiction. I was an army brat. I was incredibly shy. Thank God, unlike the character in my book, I did have a brother and sister to kind of cling to as we traveled around the world. And I remember giving book reports in elementary school and almost like fainting from fear. And in my first job, having to give a report and just choking up from public speaking. And it's hard. I think a lot of authors are. Writers tend to be introverts. I mean, we sit at our computers and write. And I wrote an article recently for my local book group about putting yourself out there, and even going to book events and smiling and talking to people. And I said, it may be hard. It may be a forced smile. I said, but you fake it till you make it. And, you find sometimes you don't help sell a lot of books and it hurts, but maybe you make connections. You talk to the authors on either side of you. You have, you find in it what you can. And so, it's not easy promoting your book. And I've tried to look into different things to do it. And I'm like, well, I'll just write my books and be happy with the people.
It's a legacy. It's a legacy to your family. It's a legacy of yourself, out there in the world. So I love that about it.
And I've started doing speaking engagements to get myself out there as well. I'm not sure I sell many books at them, but I do talks about writing memoirs. And not that I write memoirs, but I explain to people, I tell them what a memoir is. And I said, if you don't want to bare your soul or, throw all your relatives under the bus, you can fictionalize it, which is what I do. There are many, many stories in my books that are almost straight up out of my life. But the best part of writing your life as fiction is you can change the end. You can make it better, which you can't do if you write a memoir. You got to stick with the facts.
That's what I've chosen to do. I have a thread of memoir running through my stories, but I wanted to couch them in fiction. I didn't want to go the memoir route, although I may at some point, but I like what they're calling creative nonfiction.
Yeah. And in my second book about the lonely army brat, I wonder where I got that idea from. There's a story about her grandmother and her mother, which are the story of her mother meeting her father is, straight up my parents' meeting right before during World War II. And so I steal good stories where I can.
See, we're all so different. I always thought what a glamorous life you military families lead, and you get to go into new schools and be the new girl on campus. I always wanted that because I went to the same little small town school, first grade through 12th grade, and I wanted to be the new girl in the class.
Well, I talk about that, how a lot of Army brats use those moves to reinvent themselves. I was never good at that. But among my siblings, my sister said, she would, as we were leaving, driving away, she would cry and wave to her friends, but she was always ready for the next adventure. My brother was the kind of kid, we'd move to a new house, and that afternoon he'd have 20 people over. He'd make friends so quickly. And I was the kid that would take 6 months to 9 months to make a friend, because I was always looking for a soulmate. I just didn't want a friend. I needed somebody, who we connected on a deeper level. And then I'd finally find him and we'd be moving again. But it's funny, my husband, who I actually met and married in Germany, he was the same way. He had grown up in the same house his whole life, knew friends from kindergarten that he had gone to school with his whole life. I couldn't even conceive of it. It was just like, really?
Boring. That's what I call my life as a child. Boring.
Oh, well, mine was exciting and it was glamorous. I don't want to complain about the Army brat life. It's difficult, but it has far more compensations. I'm getting to see the world and traveling around, seeing other cultures. It's an amazing life. It toughens you up.
I would think so. Well, Patti, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today and then read from it so we can hear your tone and voice?
Well, this is actually the opening to my first book, and I always think about reading other things from my first book, but this is what happened when I was talking to my sister, and this novel exploded in my brain. Now, of course, some of it is fictionalized or made funnier. Rose in the book, who is the narrator, because I also always write in first person, and she has a bit of a drinking problem, which I do not have. I will tell you that. And so this is the bit. My sister called to get my advice about some issue with her current boyfriend. I'm not sure why she calls me. I am not the most sympathetic person, nor do I have any advice to give, or at least any she wants to take. Like most people, she's only interested in hearing what she wants to hear, but she claims that I am brilliant when it comes to giving her advice. As I listened to her going on and on about the numerous issues with her relationship, I wondered if this was going to be a 2-glass wine call or possibly 3. Better pace myself, I thought, taking a sip. I don't understand him, Rose, Ivy said. When we first started dating, he was so sweet and the sex was awesome. Too much information, I mutter to myself. Now he barely touches me, and we hardly even talk. He spends all of his time staring at his phone, ignoring me. I try to start a conversation, and he continues to stare at his phone. If I manage to get his attention, he looks annoyed. I ask what he's looking at that's so fascinating, and he just mumbles, nothing, and looks back down. Nothing? If it's nothing, why does he keep looking at it? Why does he prefer to look at nothing instead of me? But I keep trying. I give him a big, bright smile, and he doesn't even smile back. Who does that? Who doesn't return someone's smile, especially someone they're dating and supposedly in love with? Sounds like an asshole to me, I replied, taking a big sip of wine. I'm worried about him, she continued. I'm wondering if there's something psychologically wrong with him. Maybe he's depressed or bipolar, or maybe he has Asperger's. You know that thing where people can't relate to others? Seriously? This is why you called me? Trying to figure out this guy's possible clinical diagnosis? Yes. I'm sure you can tell me. I think there's probably some ethical restrictions concerning diagnosing people over the phone, especially after a brief acquaintanceship. A 3-glass call, I decided, and took a big gulp. Don't go all ethical on me. It's not like I'm asking you to have the guy committed. And what do you mean, brief acquaintanceship? Steve and I have been dating for almost 2 years. Yes, true. You have been dating him. I, however, have tried to keep my contact with him to a minimum. Didn't like him from the moment we met. Really? Ivy sounded hurt and confused. Why don't you like him? I almost choked laughing. Ivy, you called to tell me what a jerk he is and how badly he treats you, and then you ask me why I don't like him? Seriously? Well, you didn't know all that about him when you met him. True, but it was obvious he was pompous. I was baffled by what you could possibly see in him. I was lonely, she wailed, and the sex was great. It blinded me to his other faults. Even though she couldn't see me, I rolled my eyes. Sex isn't everything, Ivy. Not everything, she sniffed, but an important thing, and I'm still waiting for your expert opinion on what might be wrong with Steve. Well, my professional opinion is the guy is an asshole, I replied, thinking to myself, like most of the men you married or dated. Oops. Okay, Rose, he's a jerk, but is there something else going on? I will give you the best advice I can give after years of dealing with people of all ages, shapes, sizes, neuroses, etc. Dump him and move on. Who cares what his issues are? You two are not compatible. He is not meeting your needs. And it doesn't matter if he chooses to behave badly or he can't help himself. You've invested enough time. You can't fix them. Lesson learned. Find someone better next time. Someone who gives you what you want and need. This guy is not that guy. I love you, Rose. You are brilliant. I poured myself another glass of wine.
Patti, that's great. I can hear those sisters. I can see them on the telephone. That characterization is wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I was trying to in the opening, yes, get that relationship
Well,
going.
it sounds like you had a great relationship with your sister, so maybe you found your voice there.
Well, as I said, we joke and call each other Rose and Ivy, but there are differences in our characters and our real personas.
What does your family think about having two writers in the family?
Well, I think my daughters. I have three daughters. They're very proud. I was very happy when my youngest daughter read my book and said, "Oh, I really like your voice," which seems so, I don't know, insightful or writerly or something like that. I like that I had a voice. And my oldest daughter, after she finished my first book, she said, "Oh my God, Mom, that was great. When is the sequel coming out?" At that point, I felt like I had been dragged behind a wagon over broken glass for years. And I was like, "Sequel, are you out of your mind? I don't know if I'll ever write another word." But guess what? I just finished the sequel. And I
That's so
told
great. You're quite prolific after waiting all this time.
Yes, but I was telling somebody that the sequel is my final hurrah writing, you know, biographical fiction and emotional stories. And my books are funny, very funny, laugh out loud funny, but they're also really sad. I mean, I still read passages in my books that make me cry. And as I said, the first book is about two sisters whose younger sister drowns, and the guilt that engenders. And I had a sister who drowned when she was young. And while it actually, in that case, happened before I was born, it leaves, a scar in the fabric of a family
Absolutely.
that never really heals. And so I joke that my next book is going to be a mystery. I love mysteries, but I never know, how do they put them together? How do they do those breadcrumbs? How do they get all the clues in there? So I'm really going to step out of my comfort zone. I might not ever finish it, but it'll be fun.
I feel the same way. I'm reading all these psychological thrillers, so I want to try my hand at one of those. Maybe kill off an ex-husband along the way.
That's the other good thing about writing fiction. You can get revenge against people. Give them a different name, but give them a terrible ending. Yeah. And there's a certain satisfaction in that.
There really is.
Psychological thriller. No, not going there.
Well, as always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are unique. Do you have any advice for writers 50 and above?
Well, I have sprinkled a little advice throughout this. And, I will say that after you retire or after you turn a certain age, you have a whole wealth of experience to draw from. I always think about these people who think they're going to be a writer when they're 20, and some people are probably good at it, but I feel like I couldn't have written this well, if I had tried. I look back at some of the things I wrote years ago and I'm like, oh my God, it's painful. It's embarrassing. So it helped to have that world experience, to go through a lot of trauma and unhappiness, but also happiness, great things. And but my other advice is, if you want to be a writer, look for a local writing club, join your writing club, go to the meetings, learn everything you can, join a critique group who will tell you, you use that word, 12 times in a sentence. And that's such a cliche. And, sometimes my writing group has said things to me. I'll be actually leaving my critique group and my face will be burning because of, a bit of a scathing critique. I mean, we try to be nice, but sometimes you have to say, that is just not working. And, my face will be burning. And then I start thinking about it. Then after the pain goes away, I start thinking about it. And I'm like, yeah, they're right. They're right. I did not flesh that character out well enough. It is to this or to that. And then I go back and rewrite it and take it back the next meeting. And they're like, yeah, this is it. So I think a critique group is invaluable. It's interesting because in my critique group, everybody writes a different genre. And a lot of them are things I would never read. One of them is sort of mythological, sci-fi, phantasmagorical, and I wouldn't read that. But, I can read her stuff and point out things like, oh, well, you said this 12 times. Let's, tighten that up or something. So it also puts you, and now when I read regular books, I'm always critiquing them. You can't turn it off. And if you're going to try to go the query route to find an agent, to find a publisher, for God's sake, wait until your book is completely polished. And the other thing I will say, if you self-publish, which is great that there's that option in today's world, I did not want to go that way. You need to get an editor. You need to get a professional editor. You can't say, oh, my husband and my son read it. No, get a professional editor, because people who are too close to you can't edit your book. You can't edit your book. People will say, well, I'm an English teacher. I can edit my book. No, you can't. It's not just editing for whether words are spelled correctly or there's a comma in the right spot. It's content editing. And, somebody with who's not close to you is the one who's going to pick up on that and say, it's not working. So I think that's all my advice.
That's great advice. And I say that our wisdom and our hindsight just enriches our work. And that's why I call it Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. So we appreciate your being with us here today. And we're happy to count you now among our authors over 50.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And I'm actually writing in my sweetest quarter, but but I think that you really need that life experience to write a good book. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to hearing our talk.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.